Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. 5 days have passed, hundreds of people have died, and in this 5 day war, there's escalation. Luckily, there's also negotiation going on. So this is possibly for the first time in the history when the active war is there, when the fighting is going on, you're also negotiating in a third country. Belarus, there's a place where negotiations taking place. But this war, which has divided clearly the world into two blocks, is escalating. Russia, while negotiating, has also put on alert its nuclear forces. And that can be dangerous. That can be dangerous. I agree that it may never start at a nuclear war and hopefully would not start. But there are certain implications, both political, economic, and of course, who is going to suffer? It is the have-nots, the poor who are going to suffer. Unfortunately, the world was still grappling with the catastrophic impact of coronavirus. It had not gone over that. And unexpectedly, they have been increased many times by the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian forces. The crisis comes at a time when the whole world was engaged to find ways and means of reviving the economy and normalizing the abnormal conditions that were affecting the growth trajectory. Now, dumbstruck with these hostile developments, the response of the world leaders, including NATO, are abrupt and haphazard. They are starting with the severe sanctions against Russia that could mar not only the international trade prospects of those people who are imposing sanctions themselves, and their people are going to suffer. Of course, Russian economy shall be isolated, but the suffering of the people who are not in Russia will be much more. Let's not forget that this is an interconnected world, and the ramifications come straight to many Russian connected economies as well as the Western economies. The humanitarian crisis first, the devastation of life, livelihood, property, especially in Ukraine, would cause colossal, irretrievable losses. And that would take years and years to rebuild. The diplomatic channels are working fine. But the onslaught of the emerging geopolitical risk is causing intense uncertainty, and uncertainty for growth projector and growth trajectory is fatal always. The extreme volatility of the global stock market we have seen, currency, commodity, energy prices, they are having inflationary headwinds and therefore going to challenge the fiscal administrators. For example, the gas prices, the crude has crossed $105. And not only that, the food prices have gone up by about 30%. And the way the policy of normalization is set towards the wall with a softer stance continues to overcome the impact of the ongoing war. So first let's take up the financial sanctions. The sanctions have come from USA, European Union, UK, Japan, Canada, Taiwan, and New Zealand, and many more. They are targeting the banks, and that is going to damage the common man, milk exports, and all the oil refineries that will impact Russian business. But also their trading partners who will find it difficult to have transactions with them. And that is why India and UAE, which are not allies, which are basically neutral, abstained while voting in the Security Council. The US Department has targeted the core infrastructure of Russian financial system. What they have done is they have imposed sanctions against the largest banks that will impede global finance and trade flow. But as I said, this is a double-edged knife. It hurts the person who wields it and the person on whom it's directed. Now the banks will not be able to issue the letters of credit, bank guarantees, and it will impact the international trade, banking operations. It will sever their correspondent banks' ties, which allow banks to make payments globally. This set of sanctions evicts the Russian banks out of the financial system and bans their trade, and then Americans have frozen their assets. Now this would be a stumbling block for Russia with its economic ramifications, while also hurting the other interests. For example, India. Now what happens to S-400? Would the sanctions mean that India would be blacklisted? And if it's done, what happens to the American policy of using India to counteract and balance its relationship with China? Second implication is going to be of the SWIFT connectivity. Now SWIFT is a system where the international banking takes place. And in case you deny the service of the Belgium-based SWIFT connectivity with the rest of the world, it will be devastating. It's a gateway to the international money transfer that keeps the flow of the global system connected to about 200 countries. Now, depriving SWIFT access would hamper the ability of Russia and its financial institutions to conduct financial and international business and can cause intense damage. But then, if it damages Russia, how about the other countries which are getting money from which are trading with Russia? So why do you want to inflict collateral damage on those countries which have nothing to do with the war? This is absolutely uncalled for. Now what will happen? Russia will have to find alternative means to coordinate their international financial deals. It's a slow process, it's a costly process. And as I said, it will hurt the financial and international operations of many other interconnected economies, because they will also be pari passu deprived of SWIFT connectivity. But from the geopolitical risk, economies will have to factor and take positions and well advanced to withstand the vagaries of such sanctions coming their way. And SWIFT is positioned in one of the NATO countries, and with Western word at its command. The stakeholders will have to keep prepared for such an eventuality. So that problem is going to be there. But then leave the financial sanctions aside. But about the non-financial, in the intensity of progressively rising financial sanctions, USA is permitting additional troops to be stationed in Germany. Now Germany, for the first time after World War II, has started exporting Stinger missiles and things like that. So it's becoming more aggressive. So the Treaty of Versailles is practically thrown in the garbage. Now the US is sending additional troops in Germany as NATO allies to prepare that defense preparedness to meet eventualities. Does it mean that they want to have actually they're sending the arms, they're sending aircraft, they're sending ammunition, and they're sending money. But if they send their forces as well, this could lead to the Third World War. Let's not forget it. At present, this is a bilateral war between the two countries. Now, I fail to understand if the NATO and the USA-led Western Bloc is taking such action, Why were they sleeping when China and India were fighting? Why did they not put these sanctions on China at that time? Is it because they are afraid that the China is trading is much more important to them than the Russian trading is? That can be a problem. And that shows the dishonesty and dichotomy in the actions of the West. Now, the efforts of the G7 countries are to end the invasion of Ukraine. So what they have done? They have banned Russian flights. Fine. But whom are you suffering? Yes, Aeroflot suffers. But even your flights cannot go there. And not only that, people forget, for example, Air Canada now would not be able to overfly Russia to go to India because Russia is going to reciprocate. So they'll take a longer route. How much expensive it would be? Ultimately, the passenger will have to pay for that. So the Russian has banned UK flights and even transit flights. That's over. So it will impact the mobility of Russians. Now Japan, while announcing the punitive measures, reiterated that it will not favor any military intervention, and that's a sensible thing. Now, what about the health issues? The World Health Organization is emphatic about creating a safe way for reaching humanitarian and the healthcare assistance of war-ravaged Ukraine. Now, if they wanted, and the Ukraine, while it goes on, would they send the aid with the help of the armed forces? That is escalation of war, because Russia can take a plea that these forces have no right to come there. So the transport, hospitals, protection of the healthcare workers are important. Then how to manage these risks? That's the major issue. The financial sector should be prepared to manage the onset of such crisis, and you have got to have appropriate BCPs to minimize the impact. I was talking to a couple of people in India and the USA, and they said the BCP is business continuity policy. There's no break. The usual system of the risk management based on the country risk provided by the international rating agencies does not work in the situation that exists today. It is a catastrophic situation, and the financial system is nearing the breakdown. And look at the mayhem in the global stock and currency market. As I said, the spike in the crude prices breaching the US $105 mark would definitely elevate inflation, and India is likely to take a hit of 1 trillion rupees, 1 trillion rupees due to the increase in the import bills. These edible oil prices would further impact the inflation headwards. So on one side, it was the crude, the fuel, then the edible prices. Gold prices going up can have repercussions on depriving the commodity market. So the central banks are poised to normalize the policy in the post-pandemic era. Now they will have to wait for subsiding the geopolitical risk which have enhanced those risks of the pandemic. Now, those monetary policies which were supposed to be normalized in the post-pandemic period will have to wait. Then, the currency of the countries like India and Pakistan vis-a-vis France will weaken. Already, Indian rupee weakened to 75.65 on February 24. Then recovered to 75.30. But Pakistan rupee has gone down to more than 200 rupees per dollar. The swings in the stock market also have an impact on the public issues, IPOs. For example, India is going to have an LIC public issue and its pricing trajectory. The corporate sector would experience turbulence in business, particularly related to exports. And passing these economic repercussions of the standoff in Ukraine can lead to loss of momentum of recovery of economy all over the globe. The hopes that the economy is going to be better would be dashed. So the banks have to closely watch the developments to infuse liquidity. So this is a multi-headed dragon which is facing the financial world, non-financial, political, and the long-term effects are going to be much more. Would it continue as a Cold War? And I foresee something very different. I foresee a new Quad coming. Actually, matter of fact, I'm writing an article which I'll be putting up after about 4 or 5 hours. I'm writing. This new Quad would be a curious animal. The earlier two Quads were basically against China. Now this new Quad is going to contain China, and that is going to be a further headache. This new Quad, which is likely to come up, may or may not, would put the whole geopolitical scenario in a different perspective. And that uncertainty, unreliability, and a feeling of what might happen is something which is haunting the people. All the strategists all over, financial, political, business, are just waiting with a bated breath at these implications which can be devastating. The only silver lining is that the negotiations are successful and the West does not take any such precipitate action that can convert the present war into a nuclear war. Otherwise, nobody can save the whole economy, the global infrastructure going to the dogs. That I think dogs must be wondering when the word is going to come to them. This war, as a matter of fact, if this action which West is taking against Russia now had been taken when India and Pakistan fought, or when China invaded India, then maybe the situation, the geopolitical situation would not have been worsened. But the West always has its vested interest and is blind to the reality. And that is unfortunate. Thank you.